Good day, everyone. You are watching Life Edge on RELATECasts, because life just doesn't have to be that mediocre. I'm Harold Muliati, and I am joined today by our co-host, Dr. Susan Nash, and our featured guest for today is the Executive Director of the International Geothermal Association, Dr. Marit Brommer.
Welcome, Marit. It's really great to have you today, and we're thrilled to have you as our guest. I know that a lot of the people who are watching today are very interested in the future of energy, and especially in renewables. And so your specialty is geothermal. Would you like to tell us a little bit about geothermal and your background?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thank you very much for having me on your show. I think it's a great honor to be here, and I really enjoy talking about geothermal in general, but specifically this evening. For me, it's the evening because I am based in Germany, so I'm talking, it's now 7 p.m. In the evening, my time. Geothermal, and my role in the geothermal energy world is I'm the Executive Director of the International Geothermal Association, and what we try to do is pushing geothermal energy to the forefront of the renewable energy mix of the future. I am trained as a geologist by background, and this is probably also the reason why I became very interested in geothermal over the years, because I still believe that we haven't reached the full potential of geothermal yet.
That's very interesting. So in Europe, I know that there's quite a bit of geothermal in Italy. Can you talk a little bit about those reserves?
Yeah. So let's say the mature geothermal countries, so as far as we are seeing and looking at them from our perspective, are countries such as Iceland, New Zealand, Italy. Indeed, you mentioned Italy, and those countries are volcanic countries, and it has been relatively straightforward to use the hot water or even the steam coming from right beneath our feet in those countries and use them for heating up their homes or producing electricity. So those countries are at what we call the mature geothermal countries, but there are many more countries, of course, who can use geothermal energy.
You mentioned Iceland. I had a chance once to go to the Blue Lagoon near Keflavik, and it was a great experience. What they did is obviously they injected seawater into the geothermal zone close to the mantle, and then the precipitate that came out, or the cooling pond, was turned into a place where you could go and they have kind of a thermal bath, and it was supposedly good for your skin. Well, it was good for your skin, but I will say it was terrible for my hair because my hair came out totally silicified and it felt like Barbie doll hair.
Yeah, probably straight. Yeah. And that's a nice side effect of geothermal, I have to admit. It's a runoff, indeed, the precipitation of the geothermal power plant. So what I specifically also enjoy very much with geothermal is that it is an energy product. It's an energy source. But there is also another aspect of geothermal, such as, for instance, as you mentioned, the Blue Lagoon with its beautiful bathing facilities and its good skin care, for instance. So a lot of people with psoriasis, for instance, really go into the Blue Lagoon and get better afterwards. So in that respect, that's a nice side effect of geothermal.
And here in the United States, California has very active geothermal. Is that different than Europe?
No, not so much. You have it's the geysers, for instance, is one of the oldest geothermal power producers of the world. So together, of course, with the countries we've already mentioned, such as Iceland and specifically Italy. I think that originated in 1904, so that's over 100 years ago. So the geysers is a very similar setting. It has it's pretty undeep, as we call it, undeep at least, and it has a volcanic origin. So let's say those countries, such as your country as well, you are leading the show in terms of geothermal, and I believe within the association as well that's great. But there are many more countries that can add to that show. And also talking about renewable energy and the renewable energy mix of the future, when we're talking about how we move away from, for instance, fossil fuels, the debate and the dialogue is really on electricity. But geothermal is never mentioned in that sort of renewable energy mix of the future, whilst it still has that enormous potential to not only provide electricity, but also heat.
That's a really good point. Now, when you think of different countries that have a lot of prospective geothermal resources, which ones come to mind?
So at the moment, let's say moving a little bit away from the more traditional countries, when we look at different purposes of geothermal, what we see is in Asia, for instance, if we look at the entire Asian continent, Asia Pacific, I should say, what we see is that geothermal is already heavily used for direct uses, as we call bathing, spas, beauties, treatments, and so on. But you see countries such as the Philippines and Indonesia, those countries located on the Ring of Fire, for instance, so the heavily volcanic, next to the plate boundaries, lots of volcanic eruptions, easy for geothermal to connect to. Those countries have really adopted the geothermal technology to produce not only electricity, but also using it to heat up or cool down their homes, their houses, their industry, and use it for different purposes. Now, when I look at where the big potential sits in the future, starting from the European continent where we currently are, that is going to be, well, that's what we call low enthalpy, which is low temperatures, because we don't, except Italy, have those volcanic, easy to reach reservoirs. So what we need to do is drill deeper and go for hotter reservoirs deeper in the subsurface. So that's going to be for both electricity, but predominantly for district heating. And I think that's going to be the game changer for the future on the European continent, district heating for our larger cities.
That's very interesting. Harold, did you have a question?
Oh, I just thought it was interesting that you said the Philippines and Indonesia are, I believe you said, were very big on the in geothermal. That's where my family's from, both the Philippines and Indonesia.
Okay.
Oh, nice, nice. Now, did you have any hot springs near where you lived?
I've actually never been to either country, so I don't know. I've lived here in California my whole life.
This is a good start then to visit some geothermal hot springs. Yes.
Yeah. I'll have to keep that in mind.
But if we move away from, let's say, that European continent, if I look for further potential and where the real, let's say, benefits of geothermal can come into action, it's definitely going to be South America and Central America. It's going to be those island states, such as the Caribbean, for instance, where they are completely dependent on fossil fuels to be shipped in or to be coming in on a vessel. It's those countries where solar and wind is not going to make the entire supply of renewable energy going to tick the box. So they are going to look for a geothermal as their, not maybe their prime source, but as a dominant source for energy supply.
That makes a lot of sense, particularly since there are so many active volcanoes in Mexico and the Caribbean.
Yes, I fully agree. So Mexico is already really ahead of the game. They are developing at a very nice speed their geothermal portfolio. I think they are. I don't have the figures right beneath here, but I think they are country number 9 or number 8 in terms of installed capacity, as we call it, geothermal power capacity. So let's say those countries who have who have found their independence through renewable energy, they are going to be the next leaders in terms of geothermal energy. And I think for us as an association, it's really important to step in and help those countries who are at the bottom part of the learning curve, to really help to speed up and accelerate their development for whatever purpose they want to use geothermal. Because let's be honest, it's not going to be only about electricity, it's going to be heat, but it's also going to be about those tourism areas, those leisure for Costa Rica, for instance, with those beautiful national parks. It's all going to be on geothermal when we talk about sourcing their cities, the national park electricity needs, and that can be fantastically done by geothermal. You don't need oil for that.
That makes sense. So, for example, in South America or Latin America, how does your association help people get started?
So our association is, so we're called the International Geothermal Association, and we are, as they call it, an association of associations. So we have countries associations. So let's say Chile, for instance, we're talking about South America. Chile has a national Chilean Geothermal Association, and they become affiliated with the IGA. We have, in total, we have at the moment 36 countries on board, and the last one who became an affiliate association was Colombia. So we're very, very pleased with having signed the agreement with Colombia last year, because they also indicated that they are really interested in starting up their development around geothermal, and they don't want to start from scratch. They want to lean in on whatever knowledge is out there. So our association is built up of those countries. Then we have individual members. So if you're not a member of your national association, then you can still become a member, of course, of the IGA. We also have institutes, such as large R&D institutes, for instance. They become a member of the IGA. And of course, we have to be a little bit more professional in our endeavors, because we need financial support. We need sustainability as well in terms of running and managing the association. So we're also continuously on the outlook for having corporate sponsorship or corporate membership, as we call it, in order for them to share in our mission to support geothermal development worldwide.
That's a really good idea. And one of the things that comes to mind, one thing I've been involved in, is organizing a pitch fest. I did one last year, and we're doing one again this year to help people find funding for new technologies. So this might be a good place for people who have new technologies or projects to come in and make their presentations and be in front of investors or partners. Yeah.
I think that's a brilliant idea, because well, you're with the AAPG, so you're also with an association, and maybe this doesn't sound familiar, but I have the feeling that many associations at this, where we are now at 2018, we're more or less struggling with the same issues, that our membership, our original membership, is more super senior, whilst what we have to do is become as attractive to the junior, let's say the millennials and the younger, because there is still a lot of potential for the younger professionals to join an association and make their voices heard. But it's a different, let's say, type of personalities, and it's also our offers and our benefits. We need to change our model, basically, because our membership does not consist only of the 65 plus senior, super senior membership. We have to be attractive to the juniors as well.
Well, that's right. And one of the things to do is to make sure we have a way to be useful to them and provide services. And I think matchmaking between opportunities and also people seeking opportunities is one way. And in transforming communities is great, what you're doing. And talking about communities, thank you for that little bridge, because I think I really see two streams in geothermal. One is the stream, this is where the corporate entities also become very interested, is geothermal has always been seen as a very local energy source and a very local energy supply, if you like, to either a community or to one specific building, or maybe to your house if we're talking about heat pumps.
And it's this decentralized versus centralized debate that we're currently going through. And I think that will really speed up geothermal development once we are connecting geothermal to those grids, to district heating purposes, and free ourselves from that, not the negative, but a bit of the connotation that geothermal can only be used in volcanic, beautiful islands such as Iceland. And at the same time,
yeah, that's true, very true. And oh, go ahead.
Well, and at the same time, I'm also seeing, for instance, those small island development states, and especially when they're grouped, for instance, in the Caribbean, that local supply and that local ownership of your own source of energy is going to be vital for a community to become independent, not only in their hearts and minds, but also, let's say, to the bottom line. Because let's face it, a lot of these islands, a lot of these local communities are dependent on energy coming from far, far away, and they have no control over that. They are dependent on the world market prices, they are dependent on ships coming in, you know, and geothermal, some wind, some solar, some biomass, some hydropower. Let's not forget hydropower, of course. All those elements can really sustain a community's feel towards being independent and being the owner of their own energy source. And this is also a role that I want to, let's say, the geothermal to play more and more on those, let's say, yeah, small island states.
That's great. Well, you brought it. You have a very interesting brochure, and we have a digital copy of it. Would we like to go through it?
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah. I'm very proud of it because it's really fresh. We just created it, my team here in Bochum, and yeah, this is also showing our logo, and yeah, we've created a new logo. We've designed a new logo also to be more in tune and be in touch with our junior and, let's say, mid-career membership who wants to feel connected to the brand and to, let's say, what you stand for. So, as a geologist, I have to say I'm really happy with our both our logo on the right top, but also the contour lines of the Earth's planet, because we are dependent on planet Earth, if you like, for geothermal energy, whether we're doing that with hot springs and volcanism, or whether we drill deep in order to find some hot water, or whether we press hot water down into the earth and getting some nicely temperatured water back. Whatever we engineer and whatever we get from the earth, it is the planet itself that is producing this treasure, as we call it, under your feet. I'm also very, very happy with the slogan, which is called "Cool the Earth, Stay Hot with Geothermal," because one of the big challenges that we as human beings face, of course, in the future, is that we don't want to go over that 2-degree temperature threshold. And I know we're not going to cool the earth per se with geothermal, but we are one of the few, let's say, renewable powers that can really decarbonize the system. When we scale up and when we have that central approach, especially with direct heating and cooling purposes, we can really make the difference in terms of cooling the earth and staying below the 2-degree threshold. And of course, you have to do something canny as well. I mean, we want to stay hot, and we want to, you want to show what geothermal is about, because geothermal has one really downside, is that you don't see it. Yeah, you see the power plants and you see the steam pipes, etc. But really, geothermal, what is it? People don't really relate to it. So we had to make a nice slogan about it.
So does it go through what's in... Harold, is it possible to open some of the pages so we could look at some of the contents, or maybe scroll down? Yes. So yeah. What exactly is in your in the brochure, in the guide?
Well, what we're trying to tell the people who are not necessarily, let's say, geothermal professionals out there, because they know their expertise and they are the experts and they are working with us to develop geothermal. But what we're trying to do with this brochure, but also within the association, to be a good, solid communicator to those who are interested in geothermal and want to find out more. What is it? What does it do? How does it work? And we divided this brochure up in a few pages on not only just the working mechanisms of putting a drill string down there and producing hot water or steam and whatever temperature. This is about showing nice pictures and illustrating the multiple purposes of geothermal energy. This is a picture taken in Iceland. Iceland is of course the baker math of geothermal, and it's easy to find pretty pictures of fantastic either power plants or fantastic natural hot springs coming out. But we want to be showing that geothermal is not only having a good purpose, but it's also a beautiful form of earth treasures to be utilized. So that is the pure treasure here that I wanted to show, and then maybe we can go to the next one. Back to nature. Blue Lagoon, as you mentioned, I think it's a very famous geothermal spa, more or less, these days. I had the pleasure as well being there a few weeks ago, and I was just amazed with the amount of people who are visiting and paying a substantial amount of money to just, dive in it and swim and be surrounded with this beautiful, in this beautiful environment. But Geothermal for Health, that's another, let's say, campaign that we set up recently and that we want to explore a little bit more. So Harold, go to the Philippines, go to Indonesia, go to Japan, and visit perhaps Australia. This is Australia, where natural geothermal hot springs are used for relaxation, for leisure, for enjoying not only the nice landscape, but also the 32 to 35 degrees perfect temperature water. Just no engineering comes into that. Maybe some pond, as you can see, it has to be constructed to keep the water in, but that's it. And this is geothermal for health.
And I guess that also
go ahead, Harold.
Sorry, that also would help people get an idea, because as you said, people don't really know what geothermal looks like per se. It's just this sort of abstract idea, and seeing the springs and that sort of thing kind of puts a face, so to speak, on it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we face in geothermal, that what they see sometimes is a power plant and a steaming pipe. But there is so much more to it, and it gets a little bit negative than geothermal. We have to drill, and there is a power plant. Is that it? So this is, of course, a way to sort of marketing efforts to try to raise the profile of geothermal. But at the same time, I mean, geothermal energy or geothermal hot springs have been used. Our ancestors were, doing this before us. I mean, this is part of our history as well.
That's so true. Now, I have a question. Let's say that I'm in Hot Springs, Arkansas, for example. So clearly there's some hot springs, but I haven't really decided whether or not it's worthwhile to have geothermal energy. Would it cost me very much? Okay, so this is thank you, Susan, for mentioning costs. And you're welcome. I always say it depends. It depends, but it really depends. I mean, if you're in a favorable area, such as what you're referring to in a hot spring, it's relatively at a low cost. You can relatively straightforward connect the hot water with some piping to your, whatever you want to do, basically. Because if you're interested in using geothermal with a step in between, such as what we call a heat pump, in order to control the temperature in your house. Of course, if the temperature around your house in the shallow subsurface is already at a very nice degree, you don't need much. Here where I live in Germany, it gets really cold in the winter, -20, and in the summer it gets really nice, plus 25, 30. So I need really to utilize a very solid heat pump in order to make the most of cooling and heating purposes and doing that efficiently, and that hence costs a little bit more because I have to drill a bit further and etc. etc. So
let's say, what certain cities are going through in terms of district heating purposes. I mean, we're looking then, just as an example, Paris is really, really keen on, with President Macron at the moment, with his One Planet efforts, they really want to go into district heating, and they want to get rid of their fossil fuel-based system. So they have to drill quite a few wells along the Paris basin, and then we're looking at a lot of money, of course, because those are that's into the millions and millions of dollars. Just as in the oil and gas industry, drilling is the most expensive upfront cost that we have to pay. So, yeah.
That makes sense, but like you said, if you can make the heat exchangers more efficient, then I guess it's brings down the cost because you can do more with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a call for engineers and the smart minds around us. And there are already quite a few companies who are really in this niche operating in terms of using low temperature. And with low temperature, what I mean, everything until, let's say, 120, 130 degrees, and sometimes even up to 150, where the divide sits. And having some patented technology on converting exactly that range in terms of hot water to electricity, because previously, let's say a few years ago, it was only done producing electricity with high enthalpy, so let's say the high temperature reserves, predominantly the volcanics, etc., to convert to electricity. So it's new technology combined with efficiency that can drive costs down for not only the individual consumer, but also for communities to invest then in their own geothermal system. Yeah.
That's great. Now, okay, another question. Have you been to Yellowstone and seen the extremely hot springs there in the so-called super caldera or super volcano?
I was almost there last year when I went to DRC in Salt Lake City, but I could not. So because there was a beautiful field trip towards Yellowstone, and I thought I have to go. No, so I haven't, and I would like to. So next time, yeah, I can imagine that's super hot. And I think what is it called? The geyser is called Old Beard or something like that.
Faithful, Old Faithful.
Yeah. Old Faithful, yes, love the name. Yes, yeah.
Well, apparently it's heating up, and so now at a certain point, it's so hot, and I guess it's getting ready to, well, hopefully not too soon, but it's getting ready to erupt. But it's melting some of the asphalt roads, and some of the springs are extremely hot. They're boiling, and it's been the site of some tragic accidents where tourists have slipped and fallen in. But I was in this acidic too, so there's nothing to pull out after they fall in. I guess you wouldn't want a high acidic hot spring for your geothermal system. What happens when you get like high acid levels?
Yeah,
low pH.
Exactly. Let's not bath in high acids lakes. No, I agree. And this was a huge problem in the beginning of the development of geothermal. That, let's say, most of the volcanic reservoirs when we tap into the hot water percolating through those magmatics, it was not good for your either for drinking purposes or your and bathing purposes, but also not for the pipes because of corrosion and scaling, and so people had to think very carefully how to deal with that, and that's technology as well, where people have become very clever about it and have made some strong efforts in order to reduce that the downside of having to use a hot spring, for instance. But you're right. I mean, there are areas in the world where you should not use a direct hot spring in order to bath. I mean, that's for sure. So Yellowstone is not good probably for bathing purposes, and way too hot probably as well.
I often wonder if bears ever fall in, but oh well. I'm sure the occasional bear slips and falls, but that's sad. But at any rate, I mean, I think you're right, and it's just a matter of doing a lot of tests and coming up with, as you said, technology and science to handle it, because if it's just really about geothermal gradient, in theory, geothermal's everywhere.
I agree with that, and let's say once we move away from the more easy countries, so the volcanic countries, and we are moving away from that because those have been developed to the full power, or more or less, they are full. Their portfolio is full in terms of geothermal. We move away from favorable conditions, and we have to drill deeper and find hotter rocks, whether they are hot dry rocks as we call them, which we have to pump water into and then get the hot water out, or when they are filled with water, so we call them hydrothermal reservoirs, or we call them reservoirs where we have to engineer them. And those engineered systems can be anything from Carboniferous, for instance, in the Netherlands and the northern part of Germany and the northern part of Belgium, they all want to drill to 4.5 to 6 kilometers depth in order to reach the carbonates and the Carboniferous. We call that ultra deep, 6 kilometers about, in order to hopefully reach a temperature between 120 and 150 degrees. Do we have to engineer those systems? Very likely, because they will be not so permeable. So we have to do something in order to get the hot water out. Same goes for granites, for instance. I mean, there are some very, very nice projects in France in the granitic basement, and the hot water that comes out is being used for the industry, for drying foods, for instance, cereal. There's a cereal dry industry in the close vicinity of exactly let's say 5 kilometers away, and they use geothermal to dry their foods, so no fossil fuels are needed anymore. But to get that out of a very impermeable granite, we have to engineer those systems, and this is where science comes in. This is where R&D comes in, and this is also where the IGA to a certain degree comes in, because we are also there to help strategize about the future of those engineering systems, because the easy wins, same with oil and gas industry, when the easy wins were over, let's say 2 decades ago, they had to diversify their exploration efforts, and they had to understand that they had to go deeper, and we're faced with some enormous challenges. And I think geothermal is exactly at that curve, that we are faced with some enormous challenges because we're also onshore, we are in urban areas, and unless, let's say in Iceland, we can have long pipelines, but normally you will not, you will not transport your hot water or your steam over long distances. So you need to have in close vicinity the market should be there. So those are all advantages that geothermal has to go and think about. But yes, there is opportunity everywhere, but of course there are favorable and less favorable conditions still. I mean, not every project flies.
Well, just one sort of last minute kind of comment. I really like the fact that you're going to be presenting in April at an event that talks about how geothermal is combined with oil and gas. Can you talk about what you'll be talking about there?
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic initiative, and I think we should do this more and more and more, because I have a background in oil and gas, which is why I'm so open towards the collaboration between oil and gas industry and geothermal, because yes, we are a niche in terms of geothermal, and yes, we have a separate, let's say, technology, but on the other hand, the whole exploration and production side is exactly what the oil and gas industry is able to do for a century, perhaps even more. So APG, IGA, we are organizing a workshop in the Netherlands, in Utrecht, mid-April, and it's really about crossing over the disciplines. So we have invited on day one, that's the 17th of April, we've invited 7 people to talk about 7 challenges, as we wanted to call them. It's more like an open forum in terms of really understanding where the benefit sits between sharing ideas, knowledge, technology between the two industries. But challenges, I mean, it's not easy sometimes to combine, let's say, industries. It's all about people at the end of the day. It's about personal relationships. It's about building a personal relationship with different types of people around you, but also within the different industries. So I'm really pleased that we have speakers from both the oil and gas industry, such as Statoil, such as Eni, Shell, NAM in the Netherlands is coming, but also from geothermal we have some outstanding people talking, coming from university, coming from Klimian, a Swedish company looking at technology to convert heat in low temperature regions. We're talking about challenges in terms of meeting ideas of the future, and also how to overcome barriers, because there are still, of course, lots of barriers to overcome in order to fully synergize between the two industries. And we've invited technical abstracts for day 2, pre-drill risks, exploitation / production strategies, but really inviting everybody to look at crossover aspects. So not just oil and gas or not just geothermal, but really making an effort for inviting abstracts specifically dealing with crossover aspects of doing dual play concepts or using infrastructure, oil and gas infrastructure, and using it for geothermal or exploitation strategies in order to produce both, well, still produce oil and maybe co-produce geothermal with it, or you name it, we have it, and it's going to be 2 full days, and really pleased with that.
That's great. I think Harold has a question for you.
All right. We have one final question that we always ask our guests on this show. What is the one thing in life that you would say gave you an edge?
That gave me an edge?
Yes.
Okay, so I didn't get it. The one thing that gave me an edge, I think becoming a parent.
Great.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just to illustrate that a little bit, before becoming a parent, I was also very keen on always making life better and trying to make the most of it, etc. As I said, I've been working in the oil and gas industry for quite some time, but after becoming a parent, I became really interested in the future. I think somebody said once, I can't remember who it was, but we didn't inherit the planet from our parents, but we borrowed it from our children. And I think that's very interesting in terms of facing the energy transition and being an important part of that, with now pushing geothermal, of course. But becoming a parent really made me realize that the future is there for our kids, for the next generations, and we have a duty to really take care of it right now.
I really like that.
Yeah, that's I don't know if we've had...
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Well, we are at about the end of our time. Thank you so much for coming on, Marit.
Well, thank you again. It went so fast. I can't even believe that we're already through it, but I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.
It was really a pleasure.
And thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us here on Life Edge. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.